She used to call me her shadow. Now she calls me that woman who babysits for a living. But when a national security alert interrupted her wedding day and my face flashed across every TV screen in the room, suddenly I wasn't just an afterthought anymore. I was the one who saved her. You want to know what it feels like to be forgotten by your own blood and then be the one who steps in when they need saving? This story isn't about revenge. It's about rediscovery of truth, identity, and the power of doing the right thing, even for the ones who never saw you. My name is Margaret Clark, though most people who knew me well called me Maggie, if they remembered me at all. At 42, I had lived a life that rarely made headlines. I had spent 12 years in the army, specialized in tactical evacuations, and later transitioned into emergency preparedness consulting for federal buildings, museums, and large institutions. Quiet, calculated, and calm under pressure. That was me. No flashy titles, no desk in a corner office, just years of being the last person to leave when danger approached. And yet in my family's eyes, none of that ever really counted. I found the envelope on a rainy Thursday. Thick cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering, and a faint floral scent that felt expensive. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Julia Clark and Nathaniel Hayes. I stared at it like it was an artifact from a life I never got to belong to. Julia, my half-sister, though you'd never hear her use the word half. She was the golden girl, the carefully curated Instagram life wrapped in lace and laughter. Julia, who used to introduce me at parties as our family's version of a living nanny, or worse, the military aunt, who babysits sometimes. That wasn't just her humour, that was her way of erasing me without technically lying. I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter, unopened for 3 days. It felt radioactive. I walked by it like it might explode. Somewhere inside, I knew attending that wedding meant opening 1,000 wounds I had carefully stitched closed. We hadn't spoken in over 3 years. The last time we were in the same room, our father, Richard Clark, introduced me to a business associate as Margaret, the one who does some kind of security thing or childcare. I forget. I hadn't corrected him. What was the point? The part that stung the most wasn't the lack of recognition. It was the precision with which I had been removed, like my existence had been deliberately edited out of the Clark family narrative, a redacted line in their polished biographies. No one ever asked me about my deployments in Sudan or the school evacuation in Chicago I'd orchestrated that saved 400 students during a bomb threat. That wasn't glamorous enough for dinner talk at the country club. The invitation sat on my counter, taunting me. I picked it up, read every word, noted the venue, the Bellevue Estate in Carmel by the Sea, a 5-star resort with sweeping ocean views, crystal chandeliers, and enough space to make sure I was seated, far, far from the bridal party. Part of me wanted to rip it in half. Another part, the quieter, wounded part, wanted to go. Not for him, not even for closure, but for me. To see what it felt like to walk into that world again, to stand in the same room with people who had erased me, and to not disappear. Still, I hesitated. What if it went exactly as expected? What if I was again the outsider looking in, smiling politely while being introduced as someone who used to be in the military, as if that were a temporary illness I'd recovered from? I called Alicia, my best friend since basic training, and read the invitation aloud. She let out a low whistle. "Julia's getting married, huh? Are they giving out awards for fake smiles and daddy's money?" "I don't know if I can stomach it," I admitted. "You don't need to," she said. "But if you go, don't do it for them. Go as you. Go as the woman who saved more lives than anyone in that ballroom could imagine." I let her words sit. Not for them, for me. That might be enough. I wasn't always this composed. Growing up, I learned to mask emotions before I even learned to name them. Julia, younger by 7 years, was the type of child who cried at scraped knees and got carried to the doctor. I was the one told to brush it off and be strong because that's what big girls do. When Julia failed a test, she was stressed. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. Her missteps were forgivable, mine were invisible. Our father, Richard, adored her, not just as a daughter, but as a reflection of himself. Julia was polished, presentable, photogenic. The Clark brand in miniature. I was none of those things. I was awkward, quiet, intense. I asked too many questions. I challenged things, he said. By 12, I had stopped trying to impress him. By 16, I stopped expecting anything from him at all. When I joined the army, he told people I had taken a gap year. When I returned with a Bronze Star and 3 commendations, he said. That's nice, but when are you going to do something real? The memories churned as I stood in front of the mirror days before the wedding, holding up dress after dress that didn't feel like me. Sequins, chiffon, blush tones, they all looked like I was playing a part in someone else's script. Alicia sat on my bed, scrolling through photos on her phone. "What about that navy jumpsuit you wore to the FEMA gala?" she asked. I shook my head. "Too formal." "What are you thinking?" I stared at my closet. "I'm thinking uniform." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "No," I said, more to myself than to her. I spent years trying to be someone acceptable to them. They still managed to rewrite me as a glorified babysitter. Maybe this time I walk in as exactly who I am, and if they can't handle it, I'll be out in 15 minutes. She smiled, slow and proud. That's the Maggie I know. The uniform was understated. Black tactical pants, a fitted blazer with the Meridian Protection Service's crest subtly embroidered on the sleeve, and low-profile boots. I looked professional, composed, and unshakably me. I packed a backup dress in my carry-on just in case, but deep down I knew I wouldn't need it. Before leaving, I decided, against my better judgment, to reread the invitation one last time. That's when I saw it. Miss Margaret Clark, childcare assistant. I blinked. Childcare assistant, not consultant, not specialist, not even security. Childcare. The heat flushed through my chest and climbed to my face like a rising tide. I reread it again and again, as if somehow the letters would realign into something more accurate. But no, it was printed there, clear as daylight. There it was, proof once more that even in the curated beauty of Julia's big day, I was a misprint, an afterthought shoehorned into their world as gently as a typo. For a moment I considered not going, tossing the whole trip, but instead I folded the invitation, placed it in the inner pocket of my blazer, and zipped my suitcase shut with steady hands. If this was how they wanted to frame me, so be it. But this time, I would not be edited quietly out of the picture. The Bellevue estate looked like it had been plucked straight from a wedding magazine and dropped on the California coast. Ivory stone walls towered behind manicured gardens. Fountains danced under sunlight, and white orchids trailed down the marble stairs in arrangements too delicate to touch. Valets in tuxedos moved with mechanical grace, opening doors, offering champagne, greeting guests by name. No one greeted me. I stepped out of the Uber in my tailored security blazer and watched heads turn, not out of recognition, but confusion. One of the coordinators, a young woman in an earpiece and clipboard, rushed over with concern. "Hi there, deliveries go around back," she said quickly, gesturing towards the service entrance. "I'm a guest," I replied calm. She blinked. "Oh, name please." "Margaret Clark." Her eyes flicked to the tablet. She scrolled, frowned. "Oh, right, you're—" She hesitated, clearly unsure how to categorize me. "Julia's friend. Sister," I said evenly. "Right, of course. I'll have someone show you to the guest check-in." It wasn't a big moment, nothing dramatic, just a slight flinch in her eyes. The one that said, "This doesn't fit the image I had in mind." But I followed the bellhop anyway, down a hallway that reeked of lilies and white wine, past soft laughter and clinking glasses to the check-in table tucked beside the lobby fountain. No one there recognized me either. The woman checking names didn't look up as she handed me a welcome bag, with my name scribbled in cursive on a tag. Miss Margaret Clark, child heir assistant. A second slap, no correction from the clipboard girl, no glance of apology, just a perfunctory smile and a thin envelope with the room key and schedule. I stood there for a beat too long before turning away. The estate was large enough to get lost in, but I followed signs to the guest suite and found mine furthest from the main building, tucked behind a row of palm trees. The bag held overpriced trinkets, sparkling water, chocolate almonds, and a note from Julia in pre-printed script. "We're so happy you could join us. Love, Jules and Nate. No personal message. No see you soon. Just the same note they probably sent to their accountant and her yoga teacher." The mirror in the suite caught me off guard. I looked severe but strong, not someone who needed approval to exist in that space. I adjusted the blazer, brushed the invisible dust from the lapel, and left for the welcome dinner. It was held on a cliffside terrace with a sweeping view of the ocean. Tables dressed in white linen shimmered under string lights, and jazz music floated on the salty air. The guests glided from one group to another in soft pastels, teeth gleaming, cheeks tight with practiced smiles. No one approached me, then I saw him. My father. Richard Clark hadn't changed much. Still tall, impeccably dressed, his hair more silver than salt and pepper now, but his presence as immovable as ever. He stood with a group of men near the head table, glass in hand, laughing too loudly. When our eyes met, his smile faltered. He didn't walk over, didn't even wave. Instead, he nodded once, the kind of nod you give a stranger holding a door open for you, and turned away. I stood frozen for a moment, that old ache tightening across my chest. Then I made myself move, finding the seating chart. My name was at table 12 near the restrooms, far from family, of course. I found the table, sat alone, until Julia arrived. She looked radiant, golden hair in soft waves, dress clinging in the exact way celebrity brides achieved in bridal magazines. She was flanked by her fiancé, Nathaniel, and Nick, and 2 bridesmaids. Her eyes landed on me, and for the briefest second something unreadable flickered there. Then the smile. "Maggie, I'm so glad you made it." I stood as she approached. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." She leaned in for a quick hug, barely grazing my shoulder, then turned to Nate. "This is Margaret," she said sweetly, "my sister. Well, half-sister, technically, different mums. No shared blood, really." My breath caught. She said it so casually, as if biology determined belonging, as if I hadn't once rocked her to sleep through a thunderstorm when she was 5, as if I hadn't taken a punch at 16 from a boy who made her cry in the school hallway, but all that history vanished in the glint of her diamonds. "Nice to meet you," Nate said, offering a polite smile. "You too," I managed. They moved on greeting others, and I stood there trying not to disappear. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated affair. Guests were ushered towards their assigned tables by attendants who smiled a little too brightly, offering compliments like appetizers. The best tables closer to the het with the best ocean view were occupied by what Julia considered her inner circle: CEOs, influencers, old money, family, friends. The further back the table, the more disposable you were. I was at the end of that line, squeezed between the restrooms and the kitchen entrance, where the smell of garlic and bleach alternated depending on the breeze. Table 12, my name card sat beside 2 empty chairs, neither of which would ever be filled. Even the floral centerpiece was wilted, like the flowers knew their place in the hierarchy. I made peace with it. This wasn't about ego. I told myself that at least 10 times. Then Julia approached again. She walked towards me like she was preparing for a photo op, phone in hand, followed by 2 of her bridesmaids. They all looked stunning, coordinated in pale gold. Their laughter reached me before they did. Well, if it isn't G.I. Barbie," Julia said with a sharp grin. "Or is it Army Barbie now? I can't keep track." Her bridesmaids giggled. I stood, keeping my face unreadable. "Nice to see you too." She looked me up and down. "The blazer is a choice, Maggie. But hey, it's your style. Always did love a bit of drama." "It's a uniform," I said quietly. "I'm working after this weekend. Had to pack light." Julia rolled her eyes. Right, because saving the world can't wait. Anyway, try not to intimidate the guests with all that tactical energy. People are here to relax, not rehearse an evacuation drill. The sting hit deeper than I expected, but I stayed silent. Arguing with her would only feed the narrative she loved, that I was too serious, too intense, too much. She flounced away with her entourage, laughter echoing behind her. I sat down slowly, fingers clenched in my lap, trying to regulate my breathing. That familiar weight settled over me, the sense of being the family's punchline. No matter what I did, no matter what I became, I would always be Maggie the misfit, the one who didn't belong. I glanced towards the exit. 15 minutes. That was the deal I made with myself. If it got too painful, I could leave. I had no obligation to stay and be publicly humiliated. I pushed my chair back and started to rise when I saw her. An older woman near the buffet table was wobbling slightly, one hand bracing the edge of the tablecloth. Her eyes were unfocused. No one around her noticed. They were too busy sipping wine, snapping selfies, or dissecting the shrimp cocktail. Then she collapsed. No dramatic gasp, no scream, just a slow, silent fall. Her knees buckled and she slid sideways, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I was already moving. I reached her side in seconds, dropping to my knees. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. I checked her pulse, faint but present. Shallow breathing, possible cardiac episode. I eased her onto her side, propping her head up with my blazer, and loosened the buttons on her collar. "Mum, can you hear me?" I asked gently. "Squeeze my hand if you can." Nothing. "Someone call for me." "Medical!" I shouted, but no one moved. Guests stared from their seats, drinks half raised, phones hovered. No one stepped forward. Finally, a waiter rushed off to find help. I stayed with her, talking calmly, keeping her conscious. After what felt like an eternity, a staff medic arrived and took over. I gave a quick summary of her symptoms and what I'd done. The medic nodded, thanked me, and began tending to her. And just like that, I faded back into the crowd. No applause, no recognition, not even a thank you from the woman's companion. I stood, brushed off my knees, and returned to my lonely little table by the bathroom. The guests were already back to sipping wine as if nothing had happened. The evening carried on with mechanical cheer. A string quartet played something classical that no one really listened to. Waiters glided between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Their movements so rehearsed they might as well have been part of the decor. Laughter floated under chandeliers. Conversations buzzed with superficial charm. And yet something was off. I noticed him near the bar first. A server, tall, wiry, with sleeves slightly too long, and a name tag that read Derek. He wasn't mingling like the others. Instead, his eyes scanned the room in a wide, deliberate arc. Not admiring, not observing, calculating. At first, I chalked it up to habit. I was trained to see threats where others saw distractions. But the unease tightened when I spotted a second man, shorter, stockier, pretending to adjust wine glasses at the dessert table. His movements were sloppy. He handled the stemware like someone unfamiliar with catering work. And more than once I caught his gaze flicking towards the exits. I let my glass of water sit untouched. There was a rhythm to professional security awareness. The trained eye learns what is normal and, more importantly, what isn't. These two didn't fit the flow, and then I saw the third by the east entrance. A woman with a catering tray and no tray liner. She looked nervous, her fingers twitching every time someone brushed past her. 3. That was enough to raise a flag. I stood casually and began moving through the crowd with purpose, weaving between guests with the relaxed ease of someone stretching her legs. In reality, I was triangulating positions, noting patterns. My instincts were rarely wrong, and my instincts were now screaming. There was a door marked Authorized Personnel only near the staff hallway. The kind of door guests weren't supposed to notice. I slipped through when no one was looking. The hallway was cooler, dimmer. The faint hum of refrigeration units mixed with the clatter of distant dish trays. I moved quickly, finding the Staff Operations Centre tucked behind a closed security door. A young man sat behind the desk, barely older than 20, distracted by a video game on his phone. The room had several security monitors, most showing various angles of the event. Crowd movements, catering lanes, parking lot feeds. I cleared my throat. He startled. "Mom, I know I'm not supposed to be here," I said calmly, flipping open my ID. "Margaret Clark, Meridian Protection Services. I'm not here officially, but we may have a problem." He hesitated, eyeing the ID, uncertain. "I've identified at least 3 individuals in catering uniform who don't match movement protocols. Their gear's wrong, their behaviour's off. Can I see the personnel list?" He still looked unsure, but tapped at his screen. I scanned the roster, names, photos, shift assignments. 2 minutes later, I confirmed it. 3 of the faces I'd seen weren't listed. And then I found the 4th by the south patio working the bar. An unfamiliar man unregistered in the system, 4 total. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just bad training, this was infiltration. "I need to speak to your security supervisor." I said, "He's on rounds. Radio him now." The kid hesitated, then picked up his walkie. Static crackled, followed by a deep voice. "Jenkins, here, this is Clark. We've got 4 unauthorized individuals in service uniform across the property. I've confirmed they're not on your personnel list. They're coordinating." "Clark," Jenkins echoed. "You're a guest, aren't you?" "Yes, a guest who just spotted a possible breach in your security team, and if I'm right, you've got less than 30 minutes before they act." There was a long pause. Then Jenkins said, "I'll look into it, but stay out of staff areas, Miss Clark. You're not part of this operation." Ah, the walkie clicked off. I stared at it for a moment, then turned back to the monitors. Fine. If they didn't want my help, I'd do what I'd always done, work alone. Back in the privacy of my suite, I pulled out my phone and opened a secure messaging app. If I couldn't rely on the estate's internal security, I needed someone who would take this seriously. Someone with credentials, someone who trusted mine, I typed quickly. "Maggie Clark, need a second opinion." 4 unregistered operatives posing as catering staff. Behavior pattern suggests coordinated intel gathering. High-end wedding, Bellevue Estate, Carmel. Thoughts? The reply came almost instantly. "Caleb J. FBI. Damn, that matches a pattern we've been tracking. Mobile robbery units targeting luxury events. Hit a gala in Scottsdale last month. Nobody caught. Maggie Clark armed. Caleb J. possibly. Last crew used mild disruption. Lights flickered. Sound cut, then sweep. Took $1.4 million in jewelry. Maggie Clark. Same mo here. I'll prep for containment." I stared at the message. This wasn't just a bad vibe anymore, it was real. I grabbed my go bag from the closet, habit from deployments, and unzipped it on the bed. Inside, small earpiece, portable flashlight, pressure bandage kit, tactical pen, and a backup ID card. Nothing illegal, nothing flashy, just the tools of someone who refused to be helpless. Next, I pulled out a legal pad and began sketching the layout of the estate from memory. Exits, bottlenecks, high-value areas. The jewelry display case was positioned near the central atrium for a post-ceremony blessing. Vulnerable. The east entrance had no visible cameras. Weak. The staff hallway intersected the power supply, possible access point. Then came the mental checklist. Secure elderly and children first. Monitor lighting shifts. Identify point of entry. Create a visual marker for other guests. Distraction if needed. Disable service elevator if suspects attempt exit through kitchen. It was muscle memory now, decades of training collapsing into a plan stitched together with instinct and cold logic. But then something caught my eye. As I went to toss the welcome packet into the trash, the insurance documents slipped out. A printed copy of the wedding policy included for guests just in case. I skimmed it without interest until a line near the bottom made me pause. Insured value of event $3.2 million. Coverage includes all gifts, jewelry, vendor assets, and force majeure, including theft, disruption, or cancellation. That by itself wasn't suspicious, but the next clause raised every internal alarm. Coverage applies fully even in the event of non-violent theft or stage disruption if unpreventable. What kind of policy covers stage disruption? I flipped over the back page. The policy had been modified 2 weeks ago, approved and signed by Julia's fiancé, Nathaniel Hayes. A strange cold spread through my chest. Why would a finance-savvy groom adjust a high-end wedding policy just days before the ceremony unless he knew something would go wrong? Unless he planned for it. I opened my browser and searched the policy number through my private intelligence database. It was a platform my consulting firm used to track corporate insurance fraud. Within 30 seconds, a ping. Nathaniel Hayes had connections to a recently dissolved company specializing in event protection. A shell firm with no physical office, no employees on record, and 3 unresolved insurance claims tied to luxury event losses. My stomach twisted. Was this whole thing orchestrated? Had Julia and Nate hired these imposters themselves? Was this a con master's a wedding? The idea felt too wild, too outrageous, but also perfectly logical for people who lived their lives through appearances and leverage. I stared at the wedding schedule, then at my drawn-out map. I didn't know whether the threat came from outside or inside, but either way, something was coming, and I'd be ready. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, curated for social media. Guests filed into the flower-drenched garden under a golden sky, their designer shoes tapping softly against the white stone path. Strings swelled as Julia emerged, breathtaking in a gown that shimmered like moonlight. Every detail had been hand-picked for visual impact. The imported orchids, the candle-lit arch, the string quartet that shifted seamlessly between Vivaldi and Coldplay. I stood near the rear just behind a cluster of distant relatives, my eyes never leaving the perimeter. I scanned faces, checked servers, watched for formations. The 4 I'd clocked earlier were nowhere in sight. That was either good news or terrible. As Julia reached the altar and slipped her arm into Nathaniel's, I caught my father dabbing at his eyes, overwhelmed with pride. A man who'd once looked through me now wept for the daughter who'd made the cover of Modern Bride. Even now, that truth settled heavy. The officiant began his welcome. Vows followed, brief saccharin rehearsed, and then came the rings. That's when the lights flickered. At first it looked like a simple glitch. The string lights overhead dimmed and buzzed, then blinked back to full brightness. Some guests laughed nervously. A toddler clapped, mistaking it for effect. The officiant tried to continue. Then came the blackout. Everything cut, music, lights, microphones, followed by the sound no one was prepared for, a gunshot. Screams erupted before the echo faded. A chandelier swayed, glass trembling. Panic spread like wildfire. Guests surged towards the aisles, knocking over chairs, clutching their purses, their children. From opposite ends of the garden, 6 masked figures moved in fast formation. They carried weapons, compact, matte, black, tactical, not amateurs, not kids. These were professionals. One fired into the air. Nobody move. Stay where you are and keep your hands visible. A woman near the altar collapsed, fainting. A man shoved his way towards the gate, but was tackled instantly by one of the intruders. My hand moved to my blazer, not for a weapon, but for the discreet earpiece in my pocket. I slipped it in and tapped the side, activating the open police channel I'd been monitoring since Caleb's warning. Static, then partial chatter. Local PD had been dispatched. ETA 15 minutes, too long. I ducked low, crouching behind a toppled chair, scanning for the nearest vulnerable group. That's when I spotted them. 5 children clustered near the stage, frozen in fear, eyes wide. A 6th clutched a stuffed animal, tears streaking down her cheeks. No one had reached them yet. The attackers were too busy shouting commands, collecting phones, ordering jewelry and valuables into canvas sacks. I moved, staying low. I crawled across the edge of the garden, using flipped chairs and rose bushes for cover. My heart pounded, but my breath stayed measured, controlled, trained. Reaching the children, I whispered, "I'm here to help. Stay quiet. Hold hands. We're moving now." The oldest, maybe 9, nodded. Brave kid. I led them along the side hedge, then behind the catering tent where I'd spotted a storage room earlier. The lock was flimsy. One kick and we were inside. Dim, musty, but safe. "Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone unless it's me or a uniformed officer. Understand?" They nodded. Some were still crying. One boy asked, "Are we going to die?" "Not today," I said softly. "Not on my watch." I jammed a cleaning car under the door handle for reinforcement, then stepped back into chaos. It had only been 4 minutes, 4 minutes into what would later be called the most brazen armed robbery of the year. And it was far from over. Back in the garden, the robbery was in full motion. Guests lay face down on the marble aisle, hands over their heads, rings and watches piling into black velvet bags as the intruders moved with ruthless efficiency. I stayed in the shadows, circling the perimeter, searching for leadership. The one giving silent commands, the one whose eyes moved more than his mouth. I found him near the altar, tall, broad shoulders, his weapon not raised like the others, just casually cradled in one hand, observing, calculating. And then he looked straight at me. There was no hesitation in his voice. "Well, damn," he said. "Didn't expect you here." One of the other thieves turned sharply. "You know her?" "Yeah," the leader replied, smiling beneath his mask. "That's Margaret Clark, former UN tactical coordinator, if memory serves. Did some joint training in Jordan, right?" He took a step forward, gun now loosely aimed in my direction. She nearly broke my jaw during a disarmament exercise. I didn't flinch, should have tapped out faster. He chuckled, then tilted his head. "Why are you here, Clark? Don't tell me you're a guest, in that blazer." "I'm family," I said. "Technically," he whistled low, "figures. You always had a knack for landing in chaos." Then, as if it had been part of the plan all along, he reached into the bridal party, yanked Julia to her feet, and pressed the barrel of his gun to her ribs. She screamed, a full-throated, shattering scream that cut through the den like a siren. "Let's make this simple," he said. "I walk out of here with what we came for, and Princess here stays alive. You get in my way and she doesn't." My stomach clenched. Not because of fear, but because of the look on Julia's face. Pure terror and something else at recognition. "Don't hurt her," she cried. "Please, she's my sister." A beat of silence passed, and in that moment I saw it. The crowd, the dozens of guests lying still, trembling, froze, then stirred. Heads turned, whispers began. "Sister, I thought she was a nanny. Wait, she's family." The narrative cracked. Years of being dismissed, rebranded, erased, undone in a single word, blurted out through fear. I locked eyes with Julia. She knew what she'd said, and there was no taking it back. The leader raised his voice. "Interesting turn of events." He pulled Julia closer, gun firm against her side. "You going to play hero again, Clark?" I stepped forward slowly. "You don't want to do this. Let her go and I'll walk with you." "No resistance," he grinned. "You trade yourself for her? She's not trained. I am." "Exactly," he said. "You're more dangerous, less predictable. She's a bride, not a threat." "But me?" I raised my hand. "Slightly. You already know what I'm capable of." He hesitated, and in that hesitation I moved. Just 2 steps, enough to get between him and the guests, enough to put myself in his line of fire. "You shoot her," I said. "You lose leverage. You shoot me. You still might not make it out of here. A standoff." And then he pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the air. Pain exploded across my left side. I went down hard, gasping as my shoulder lit up with fire, but I saw what I needed to see. Julia shoved to the ground, but untouched, scrambling away, and security finally moving. From the edges, 2 plain officers revealed themselves, weapons drawn, others surged forward. The attackers shouted. One tried to run, another aimed wildly. But the guests didn't scatter. They watched. Because in that moment, I was no longer invisible. They say chaos only lasts a moment, but its echo lingers. By the time the gunfire stopped and the police secured the suspects, I was sitting on the stone edge of the garden fountain, blood soaking the left shoulder of my uniform. Paramedics worked quickly, applying pressure, their voices calm but urgent. Julia sat several feet away, pale and shaking, wrapped in someone's tuxedo jacket. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. The rest of the guests stood in scattered clusters, dazed and breathless, buzzing with the shared adrenaline of trauma. Phones were out, cameras rolling, whispered conversations turning into replays and replays into narratives. That's when I heard it. "Oh my God, that's her. She tackled the guy with a gun. No, she got shot saving the bride. She's like some military badass. You didn't see what she did." I didn't have the energy to correct them. An officer approached, notebook in hand. "Ma'am, we're getting everyone's statements, but we're going to need more detail from you later. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said hoarsely. "You're bleeding. It's not fatal." He gave me a strange look. "You military," I nodded. "Explains a lot. Honestly, you saved lives today." I looked away. They always said that after. As I sat there waiting to be taken to the on-site clinic, I heard the unmistakable voice of my father. "And of course, I wasn't surprised," he said, standing in front of a small group of local news reporters. Cameras pointed at him like sunflowers. "Maggie's always had a sense of duty. That's who she is. It's no shock she acted with courage. She's someone I've trusted since she was a child." My head turned. He wore that same tight smile he always did when trying to sell something, his hand gestures precise, his tone warm but performative. The media ate it up, a father praising his heroic daughter in the aftermath of a terrifying attack. It was good television, only it was a lie. He hadn't trusted me. He hadn't even respected me. And now, as the cameras rolled, he was rewriting our history in real time, erasing years of dismissal, replacing them with fictitious pride. I wanted to stand up, walk into frame and say, "Ask him what he called me at dinner last year. Ask him how many times he's told people I babysit for a living." But I didn't. I let him speak because this wasn't about him, not anymore. Half an hour later, I sat in a quiet room in the resort's clinic while a medic stitched the wound. A clean through and through in the shoulder muscle. It hurt like hell, but it could have been worse. Much worse. As she worked, my phone buzzed again and again. Dozens of missed calls, texts, mentions. The video was already online. I opened one at random. A shaky vertical phone recording that had already been viewed over 2,000 times. It showed me stepping between Julia and the masked man, raising my hands, then diving to shield her just before the shot rang out. The caption read, "She's a hero. Unknown guardian saves bride during armed wedding attack." Below, hundreds of comments poured in. "Who is she? Protect her at all costs. That woman is more than a guest. She's a damn legend." I dropped the phone onto my lap, numb. I hadn't done it to be seen. I hadn't acted for fame, or family, or redemption. I did it because someone needed to, because I was trained to, because I couldn't not. The world, however, had already decided to rewrite me, just like my father had, but this time in my favor. The invisible woman had a name now, Margaret Clark, the unknown guardian. I slipped away before the cameras could find me. Back in my hotel suite, I sat on the edge of the bed in my blood-stained blazer, the sterile scent of antiseptic clinging to my skin. The room was quiet, too quiet. No orchestra, no applause, no whispers, just me and the hum of the mini fridge. I hadn't turned on the TV. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were saying. They were calling me a hero, a guardian, a warrior. All the things I had spent years being, just never loudly enough for anyone to care, until now. I stripped off the uniform piece by piece, folding it carefully like I did. Done 1,000 times before. It didn't feel like victory, it felt like exposure. The knock at the door came 20 minutes later. I opened it to find 2 officers in plain clothes and a familiar badge. Detective Ruiz, the lead on-scene investigator. I'd briefly spoken with after the shooting. The man beside her looked federal. Miss Clark, Ruiz said, sorry to intrude. May we come in? I stepped aside without a word. They entered, exchanging glances before Ruiz spoke again. We wanted to update you. The 6 suspects are in custody, but there's an additional development. She handed me a photo printed from surveillance footage. Grainy, but clear enough. The man on the right holding a weapon and standing near the altar. That's the one who recognized you, she said. The leader name's Connor Vance, former private contractor, dishonorably discharged. We've been tracking him. I nodded, jaw tight. He knew my credentials, said we trained together in Jordan. Right, but it's not just him, Ruiz said carefully. She slid another photo across the table. This one made my breath itch. You recognize him? She asked. I did. His name was Tyler Mason, neatly trimmed beard, athletic build, usually wore a leather jacket and a smug grin. Julia had dated him 6 years ago, intensely, secretly and chaotically, the kind of relationship that burned fast and left scars. He's one of the suspects, the federal agent said. Used a fake name to get through catering background checks. Disappeared for 3 years, popped back up under Vance's crew. We believe he targeted this wedding specifically. Because of Julia, I said slowly. Most likely. He always said she broke him, I muttered. That she used him for rebellion and dropped him when Dad found out. Ruiz nodded grimly. He planned this as payback, the whole thing. He wanted it to unravel on her big day. Your presence just complicated it. Not that we're complaining. They exchanged another look. That brings us to the real reason we're here, said the agent. We'd like to ask for your assistance. Off the record, of course. We're building a case against the entire crew. Your insights, your familiarity with the layout, your, let's say, personal access to the family. It's valuable. I froze. There it was again, that word I know, access. Not identity, not belonging. Access. Not because I was a daughter or a sister, but because I'd been there, like a janitor with a spare key. Let me guess, I said quietly. You figured since no one in that family will admit I'm one of them, I'd be impartial enough to help. Ruiz hesitated. It's not like that, isn't it? The silence hung between us. I looked at the photo again, Julia in the background, smiling under floral arches, unaware she was being watched. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them piece it together without me, to walk away like they always had. Why should I lift another finger for a family that only knew my worth when cameras were rolling? But then I thought of the kids I'd led into the storeroom, the staff who'd panicked but survived. Julia curled up on the ground after I was shot, whispering, I'm sorry, into her knees like a confession. I sighed. I'll help, I said, but on one condition. The agent raised an eyebrow. Name it. No interviews, no press. I do this as a professional, not your poster girl. Ruiz smiled faintly. Understood. As they left, I finally turned on the TV. The screen lit up with my face. I turned the volume down to 0. The brunch was cancelled, the ballroom taped off, and the guests gone by morning. What remained of Julia's fairy tale wedding was a stack of witness statements, broken champagne flutes, and the dull ache in my shoulder. I hadn't planned to see him. But as I stepped out of the elevator and into the quiet lobby, my father was already there, waiting. He looked older somehow, not just tired, dismantled. His usually perfect posture slumped, his cufflinks mismatched. For a man obsessed with image, it was a rare moment of unguarded honesty. Maggie, he said softly. I didn't answer. He motioned towards the hotel lounge, and I followed him in silence. We sat in the corner overlooking the empty patio where guests had once sipped cocktails and compared diamond sizes. Now it was just wind and the sound of dishes clinking in a distant kitchen. He cleared his throat. I wanted to talk before you left, I figured. I saw the footage, he said. Everything, the moment you stepped in front of her, the way you moved like it was second nature. It is, I replied. He nodded, then paused. For a moment, I thought he'd retreat, deflect, make a joke. Instead, he exhaled long and slow. I need to be honest about something. I've always seen you as a disappointment. I blinked. No softening, no euphemisms, just the raw truth dropped like a stone. I don't mean that to hurt you, he added quickly. I mean it because I owe you clarity. You didn't follow the path I set, the degrees, the law firms, the networking branches. I built an image of what a clerk should be, and you didn't fit it, so I boxed you out. I stared at him, my jaw tight. You made me feel small, I said, my voice low but steady. You called me the quiet one, the tough one. You acted like I was a backup daughter, just there to fill space between your real priorities. You introduced me as a babysitter, a helper, a joke. He didn't look away. Every time you did that, I continued, you chipped at something I spent years building, and I let you because I thought maybe if I stayed silent long enough, you'd finally see me. Emotion cracked through. But you never looked. He closed his eyes, face twisting. I know, he whispered, and I hated myself the moment I saw you step between her and that man. Not because of what you did, but because I realized I didn't deserve it. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. You risked your life for her, for all of us, and the only thing I could think about was how wrong I'd been. I swallowed hard. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The moment I heard the gunshot and saw you drop, I thought I'd lost you. And for the first time in my life, I realized what that meant. His voice cracked again. It meant I would never get to tell you that I was proud, that I admired you, that everything I thought mattered, the career, the wealth, the connections, none of it could hold a candle to the courage you showed. I stared at him, unsure what to feel. Anger, relief, sadness, probably all of it. I don't need your pride, I said, but my voice betrayed me. I needed your respect. You have it, he said instantly. You've always deserved it. I just didn't have the backbone to admit I was wrong. We sat there, the silence thick with years of unspoken truths. Then quietly, I asked, why now? He looked up. Because when you saved Julia, you saved me too, from living the rest of my life with my head in the sand. It may be too late to undo what I've done, but if there's any part of you that still believes in second chances, I'd like to try. The words hung in the air. I didn't answer right away because forgiveness is not a light switch. But maybe, just maybe, it could start with being heard. It was well past midnight when the second knock came. I sat into the hotel armchair, nursing a mug of cooling chamomile and watching the flickering city lights beyond the balcony. My shoulder throbbed with each breath. The tight bandage a reminder that even survival came with a cost. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of the guests had cleared out hours ago. The only people still in the building were police, staff, and I supposed whoever was left trying to salvage what was left of Julia's dream wedding. I opened the door. She stood there in sweats and no makeup, her hair tied back, eyes rimmed in pink. She looked human, not airbrushed, not curated, just Julia. She held something in her hand. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something familiar in a foreign land. Finally, she sat at the edge of the bed and looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. "I should have said it earlier," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my life," I nodded once. "You're welcome." She paused and her fingers curled tighter around the object in her hand. "I need to give you something." She held out a small velvet box. I didn't take it right away. She pushed it closer. "It's yours." It always was. I opened it slowly. Inside sat a delicate gold ring, a vintage design worn but intact with a single opal stone set in the middle. My mother's ring, my breath caught. "I thought this was lost," I murmured. "It wasn't," Julia said. "Dad took it after she passed. He kept it in his drawer for years. Said it didn't fit your lifestyle, that you wouldn't want it." I closed my eyes. That sounded like him. He gave it to me when I turned 21, said it should stay in the family, and I was the more appropriate choice. Of course he did. Julia's voice cracked. I wore it once, couldn't bear to again. It never felt like mine. It felt like a theft, but I didn't have the guts to return it. I looked at the ring again, the soft shimmer of the opal catching the light. My mother used to wear it every Sunday, her fingers always cold, always gentle. It had been the one thing I wanted after she died. A piece of her, a piece of us. I slipped it onto my finger. It still fit. Something inside me loosened. Our knot uncoiled. Not because of the ring itself, but because of what it meant. Recognition, restoration. I'm sorry, Julia said, for everything, the names, the way I made you feel small. I thought if I kept you in the background, I wouldn't have to compete with you, but I never realized I wasn't competing. I was just afraid you'd remind everyone I wasn't brave. The confession startled me. I stared at her, stunned. I didn't know, I said quietly. She nodded. I know. I sat it. Beside her, our shoulders not quite touching. The silence between us felt different now. Not avoidance, just space being filled finally with truth. And then, without a word, she leaned into me. I hesitated only a second before wrapping my good arm around her, pulling her close. She didn't sob. She didn't speak. She just held on. So did I. For the first time since we were girls, we existed in the same moment. Not as foils, not as shadows of each other, but as sisters. I didn't cry loudly, but I did cry. Not from pain, but from the soft, stunning ache of finally being seen. 3 weeks later, I stood beneath the soaring glass ceiling of the West Coast Civic Hall, the sunlight pouring in like judgment. Rows of people filled the chairs below. First responders, security professionals, federal agents, and their families. Behind me, a screen displayed rotating slides, photos from the wedding incident, news headlines, and clips of police statements praising the woman who had prevented tragedy through sheer will and unmatched skill. I wore a sleek black suit, no insignia, no logos, just me. At the front of the stage, a podium waited. But first it was Julia's turn. She stepped forward in a navy blue dress, hair swept back, eyes calm but moist. The crowd quieted as she adjusted the mic. There are moments in life when someone shatters your assumptions, she began. When they step out from the corner you place them in and show you they never belonged there to begin with. A hush swept the room. I grew up with a sister, she continued, but for too long I didn't treat her like one. I called her names, I ignored her accomplishments, I let others diminish her, and sometimes I joined in. She paused, swallowing emotion. But on one terrifying afternoon, I saw the truth. I saw the woman who stepped in front of danger without a second thought. The woman who shielded strangers, who bled quietly while others panicked loudly. The woman who, despite everything, still chose to save me. Julia turned to glance at me, voice trembling now. She's not just a soldier, not just a protector. She is my sister, the one I forgot to see, the one I now honor with every breath of gratitude I have. Applause surged, not polite, not obligatory, but heartfelt. And then it was my turn. I stepped forward. My legs felt steady, my heart did not. The mic stood still under my hand as I scanned the crowd. Some faces were familiar. My father seated in the front row beside Julia, Alicia nodding from across the aisle, and dozens of others who had only heard the story but came to witness the woman behind it. I took a breath. I wasn't always visible, I began. Silence. For most of my life, I existed in the margins. Not because I lacked talent or training or value, but because I didn't fit the script my family had written. I didn't wear pearls. I didn't marry well. I didn't follow the prescribed path of perfection. A ripple of recognition stirred in the crowd. I was labeled distant, difficult, even disappointing. I glanced at my father, his gaze unwavering, his face unreadable. And I believed it, I said. For a long time, I believed their silence meant I was less, that no applause meant no worth. So I poured myself into purpose quietly, privately, hoping someone somewhere might notice. Applause. Turns out sometimes the moment you're finally seen is the moment you forget to care whether they ever looked at all. Laughter, soft, relieved. I didn't act that day to prove anything. I acted because lives were at stake, because service isn't about being watched, it's about showing up again and again, even when no one claps. The emotion rose before I could stop it. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being erased by your own family, but there's also a particular strength in surviving it and standing tall. Anyway, I looked towards Julia, and there's grace too in being met halfway in healing. I finished simply, I'm no hero, I'm just someone who refused to disappear. The room erupted, not for drama, but because truth finally spoken always sounds loudest. Backstage was quieter than I expected. After the applause faded and the lights dimmed, I walked slowly down the side hall, the adrenaline from speaking already ebbing. My shoulder throbbed beneath the tailored suit, but I welcomed the discomfort. A reminder that I was still here, still real, not just some myth conjured up by viral headlines. I was halfway to the dressing room when I heard his voice. Maggie. I turned. My father stood just beyond the curtain, away from the lights, hands fidgeting with the cuff of his blazer like he didn't know what to do with them. The expression on his face wasn't one I recognized. Not businesslike, not critical, not carefully constructed. It was raw. He took a step forward, and then before I could speak, he wrapped his arms around me. Not a polite one-arm squeeze, a full embrace. It startled me more than the gunshot had. His voice was close to my ear.
I'm proud of you. I didn't move. He pulled back, hands still on my shoulders, eyes searching mine. I mean it, Margaret. I'm sorry it took so long. I don't expect it to erase anything. I just needed you to hear it. I nodded. I didn't say I don't need it anymore. I didn't say your year's too late. I didn't say anything because for once I didn't feel like proving a point. I simply let the moment be what it was. Guade honest, unfiltered, healing, even if imperfect. I'm glad you came, I said finally. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. We stood there in the quiet, and for the first time in our long, complicated story, I felt no resentment between us, just a father and a daughter meeting each other on level ground. Later that night, after the event, after the handshakes and the photos and the flashbulbs, I sat at my desk in my apartment with a mug of tea and a blank document open on my laptop. The cursor blinked. The world still knew me as the woman from the wedding, but I had lived 4 decades before that day, and I had no intention of letting the media tell my story for me. I typed the title first, Shadow Turned Shield, then beneath it, a memoir by Margaret Clark. The words came slowly at first, then in waves. I wrote about the small illness of being invisible, about sitting at family dinners and hearing your name only when someone needed a favor, about the sting of being introduced as the one who helps with the kids after leading international evacuation efforts. I wrote about silence, how heavy it feels when it comes from people you love. I wrote about my mother's hands, about Julia's betrayal and redemption, about the ring, the gun, the moment between heartbeats when I stepped in front of her and knew I might not step back. And I wrote about power, not the kind that comes from applause or medals, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are when nobody's watching. I wasn't writing to be seen anymore. I was writing because I had always been here. Somewhere around page 20, I paused and reread a paragraph. It described a childhood memory. Me in the schoolyard standing up to a teacher who had punished a classmate unfairly. My father had scolded me afterward, told me it wasn't my place, but it was. It always had been. That's who I was. A shield. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. No one had handed me a place in the world, all for you.